Notional Functional Syllabus Introduction. A notional functional syllabus is an approach where the organization of the material is determined with notions or ideas that learners expect to be able to express through the target language and the functions acts learners expect to be able to accomplish. Wilkins, 1976. In this type of syllabus, it contains the same teaching materials as traditional syllabus but organizes them in different ways such as around uses or functions. Harlow and Linda L., 1978. According to Wilkins, 1972, proponents of this kind of approach believe that the usage of language for learners is more important than the digestion of an unapplied system of grammatical forms. Therefore, a notional functional syllabus is a kind of communicative syllabus which organize units with the foundation of some functions such as asking question, expressing opinions, expressing wishes, making suggestions, complaining, and apologizing rather than including units instructing noun. Gender or present tense ending, Wilkins, 1976. First of all, I show how the notional functional syllabus was brought about and influenced by both theories of language and language learning/acquisition. Also, notional functional syllabus is a method of the communicative language approach, pioneered by D. Wilkins. It was later developed further for the Council of Europe by Van Eck and Trim. The syllabus was a reaction to the question, what will the language learners need the language for, and the notions relate to time and space, whilst functions would be agreeing, disagreeing, etc. The term functional notional approach embraces any strategy of language teaching that derives the content of learning from an initial analysis of the learner's need to express three different kinds of meaning: functional, i.e., the social purpose of the utterance; modal, the degree of likelihood; conceptual, the meaning relations expressed by forms within the sentence; categories of communicative function. These method of language teaching is categorized along with others under the rubric of a communicative approach. The method stresses a means of organizing a language syllabus. The emphasis is on breaking down the global concept of language into units of analysis in terms of communicative situations in which they are used. History of Functional Notional Approach. In 1972, the British linguist D. A. Wilkins published a document that proposed a radical shift away from using the traditional concepts of grammar and vocabulary to describe language to an analysis of the communicative meanings that learners would need in order to express themselves and to understand effectively. This initial document was followed by his 1976 work Notional Syllabuses, which showed how language could be categorized on the basis of notions such as quantity, location and time, and functions such as making requests, making offers and apologizing. Wilkins' work was used by the Council of Europe in drawing up a communicative language syllabus, which specified the communicative functions a learner would need in order to communicate effectively at a given level of competence. At the end of the 1970s, the first course books to be based on functional syllabuses began to appear. Typically, they would be organized on the basis of individual functions and the exponents needed to express these functions. For example, many course books would begin with the function of introducing oneself, perhaps followed by the function of making requests, with typical exponents being, can I, could you, is it all right if I, and so on. These would often be practiced in the form of communicative exercises involving pair work, group work and role plays. It is interesting to compare this approach with a grammatical syllabus. In a typical grammatical syllabus, structures using the word would tend to appear in later stages of the syllabus, as they are held to be relatively complex. For example, if I knew the answer, I would tell you, whereas in a functional syllabus, would often appears at a very early stage due to its communicative significance in exponents such as, would you like, which is extremely common and of great communicative value even to beginners. The need to apply a grammatical name or category to the structure is not considered important within the framework of a purely functional syllabus. The concept of functional notional approach. A functional notional syllabus is primarily based not on a linguistic analysis but on an analysis of learners' social and/or vocational communicative needs. This approach holds that the classification of skill levels should be based on what people want to do with the language, functions, or in terms of what meanings people want to convey. Notions. As such, this approach is based on the following concepts. 1. Communication is meaningful behavior in a social and cultural context that requires creative language use rather than synthetic sentence building. 2. Language is constructed around language functions and notions, functions such as evaluating, persuading, arguing, informing, agreeing, questioning, requesting, expressing emotions, and semantic grammatical notions such as time, quantity, space, location, and motion. The aim of this approach was to transfer these functions to acts of communication. Explanation of specific terms. Notions are meaning elements that may be expressed through nouns, pronouns, verbs, prepositions, conjunctions, adjectives, or adverbs. A notion is a concept or idea. It may be quite specific, in which case it is virtually the same as vocabulary, dog, house, for example, or it may be very general, time, size, emotion, movement, in which case it often overlaps with the concept of topics. A notion may be time past. This may include past tenses, phrases like a month ago, in 1990, last week, and utterances using temporal clauses beginning with when, before, after, and so on. A function is some kind of communicative act. It is the use of language to achieve a purpose, usually involving interaction at least between two people. Examples would be suggesting, promising, apologizing, greeting, inviting. Inviting may include phrases like, would you like to? I suggest, how about? Please. A situation may affect variations of language such as the use of dialects, the formality or informality of the language, and the mode of expression. Situation includes the following elements. A. The persons taking part in the speech act. B. The place where the conversation occurs. C. The time the speech act is taking place. D. The topic or activity that is being discussed. Exponents are the language utterances or statements that stem from the function, the situation, and the topic. Code is the shared language of a community of speakers. Code switching is a change or switch in code during the speech act, which many theorists believe is purposeful behavior to convey bonding, language prestige, or other elements of interpersonal relations between the speakers. The essential components found in functional notional syllabi are as follows. 1. The situations in which the foreign language will be used. A situation will always include the following: the participants, the place, and the time. 2. Topics, and what the learner will be able to do with these, for example, everyday interactions, such as buying food, giving directions, or offering advice, etc. 3. The language activities in which the learner will engage. 4. The language functions which the learner will perform. For example, personal equals expressing one's thoughts or feelings, example, love, joy, pleasure, happiness, and the everyday feelings, example, hunger, thirst, fatigue, sleepiness, etc. B. Interpersonal equals enabling us to establish and maintain desirable social and working relationships, example, greetings and leave-takings, introducing people to others, expressing joy at another's success, extending, accepting, declining invitations, apologizing, interrupting another speaker politely, etc. C. Directive equals attempting to influence the actions of others. Example, discouraging someone from pursuing a course of action, persuading someone to change his point of view, warning someone, etc. D. Referential equals talking or reporting about things, actions, events, or people in the environment in the past or in the future. Talking about language, what is termed the metalinguistic function, example identifying items or people in the classroom, the school, the home, or paraphrasing, summarizing, or translating, L1 to L2 or vice versa, etc. E. Imaginative equals discussions involving elements of creativity and artistic expression, example, discussing a poem, a story, a piece of music, a play, a painting, a film, a TV program, or creating rhymes, poetry, stories or plays, etc. 5. The general notions which the learner will be able to handle. Notions are the interaction of categories of meaning and grammatical form. Examples of notions are time, time relation, past tense, present tense, duration, until, since, quantity, countable, uncountable, space, dimensions, locations, motion, and so on. 6. The specific, topic-related, notions which the learner will be able to handle. 7. The language forms the learner will be able to use. These forms are usually referred to as exponents, which are the language utterances or statements that stem from the function, the situation, and the topic. 8. The degree of skill the learner will be required to display. Characteristics. The following are the main characteristics of the functional notional approach. 1. A functional view of language focusing on doing something through language. 2. A semantic base, as opposed to a grammatical or a situational base. 3. A learner-centered view of language learning. 4. A basis in the analysis of learner needs for using language that is reflected in goals, content selection and sequencing, methodology, and evaluation. 5. Learner-centered goals, objectives, and content organization reflecting authentic language behavior and offering a spiraling development of content. 6. Learning activities involving authentic language use. 7. Testing focused on ability to use language to react to and operate on the environment. The language skill focused a functional notional approach to language learning places major emphases on the communicative purposes of speech or in speaking skill. That is what people want to do or accomplish through speech. Do they want to invite someone to a birthday party, or do they want to write an apology letter? Thus the above gives the function of language. Thus sensitivity to the individual needs of the learners gives rise to the functional notional approach. Apologizing, we will use words like, I am sorry for all what I have done. The functional notional approach to language learning places more emphasis on the communicative purpose of speech. It focuses on what people want to do or accomplish through language. This approach has a goal to help learner use the real language or appropriate language when communicating. Thus the primary preoccupation of the functional notional approach is sensitivity to the individual needs of the students. In teaching language, the functional notional approach to language helps the teacher to first of all identify the needs of the learner and analyze the needs in order to draw the syllabus. In teaching, the functional notional approach to language helps the teacher to be able to teach the purposes of speech. Do we need language for letter writing or greetings? If so, which language do we use? The functional notional approach helps learners to use real and appropriate language for communication. Thus, in conclusion, the functional notional approach to language is classified in terms of the purpose of language, that is, what people want to communicate. Merits. Functional notional syllabuses are of a number of merits, which are mainly the major characteristics of this type of syllabuses suggested by Finocchiaro and Brumfitt, 1983. These merits can briefly be viewed from 4 perspectives. From a sociolinguistic perspective, the functional notional syllabuses emphasize the communicative purpose of the speech act. As a result, this kind of syllabuses often tries to set fairly realistic language for learners to learn. B. This approach intends to offer everyday, real-world language use in a variety of socio-cultural situations. Thus, learners will be introduced not only to grammatical knowledge of the language, but also to the cultural knowledge necessary for them to fully understand the target language and its culture. C. It recognizes that the speaker must have a real purpose for speaking, and something to talk about. From a psycholinguistic perspective, the functional notional syllabuses have placed the needs of learners at the very core of the teaching program. Consequently, a functional notional syllabus is often arranged according to different levels and needs of the target learners. B. It is intrinsically motivating because it provides actual communicative functions to serve the learner's needs. C. It understands that before asking learners to produce language, sufficient input must be provided initially. D. Thanks to its unit or modular organization of the curriculum materials, the courses can be designed in a flexible and modular way which will enable learners to learn with different rhythm or pace of learning. From a linguistic perspective, the functional notional syllabuses will help learners at each level acquire a reasonable, basic knowledge of the phonological, grammatical, and the lexical subsystems of the language, as well as the ability to use these in actual communication. From an educational perspective, the functional notional syllabuses have several other merits. A. The approach has enabled teachers to exploit sound psycholinguistic, sociolinguistic, linguistic, and educational principles. B. It can develop naturally from existing teaching methodology. C. It enables a spiral curriculum to be used which reintroduces grammatical, topical, and cultural material. D. It provides for the widespread promotion of foreign language courses. Criticism: the above merits are drawn from the ideal level of functional notional syllabuses. However, the practical application of this kind of syllabuses shows a number of problems, which has aroused criticisms against functional notional syllabuses among researchers in this field, e.g. Dubin and Olsztyn, 1986, Richards, 2001, Widdowson, 1979, etc. The major drawbacks can also be seen from different perspectives. From the perspective of course design, i.e. the application of a functional notional syllabus, the designers always encounter difficulties during the selection of the content. This is because, a. the idea of functions and notions of language is not as clearly definable as it is thought to be. B. Although there are criteria listed above for the selection and grading of the components of a functional notional syllabus, it is hard to decide such as which functions or notions is of more coverage or frequency than others. C. A need analysis is an important and necessary step before the design of the contents as whatever included in any particular functional notional syllabus are highly related to the need of the learners. However, it is always difficult to carry out a profound need analysis in a real-life situation. From the perspective of the nature of language, the basic assumption of functional notional syllabuses can sometimes be misleading, for a. the idea that language is determined by the uses or functions it performs is an oversimplistic view. B. Communication does not just refers to language functions and notions, and the process of communication somehow remains unstated in this kind of syllabuses. C. The functional notional syllabuses, in fact, also assume that language can be broken down into discrete components, various functions and notions, that can be taught separately. This assumption makes them not much different from grammatical syllabuses in misleading the real nature of language. From the perspective of language teaching and learning, functional notional syllabuses bring along dissatisfactions and problems unanswered to language teachers and learners, such as a. Grammatical structures elicited by the functions and Notions taught appear in an unsystematically order which may make teachers and learners, especially those familiar with grammatical approach, uncomfortable. B. Important grammatical structures may not be touched by the functions and notions included in the syllabuses, which may lead to low grammatical competence of the learners. C. Language functions and notions do not have particular linear sequence, which may make it ineffective for teaching and learning as the latter is a process inherently sequential in nature. D. Functional notional syllabuses are product-oriented which state clearly the expected outcomes of language learning. However, it fails to address the process of how to realize the outcomes. Students' roles, student-centered. After the Second World War, the countries all over the world developed FN education in order to meet the needs of politics, economy, military, science, tour, and culture. But the FN education was not satisfactory at that time, especially, students could not communicate with others in foreign language after learning several years. In the middle of the 1960s, the crisis of the Western education made people realize the importance of FN education and had a slogan, student-centered. At the same time, people should value the factors of the learners, intelligence, feeling, age, sex, and interests. This is a necessary feature of any classroom where the classroom is learner rather than teacher-centered. Among other things, it means to encourage students to state their opinions, to talk about their own experience, and for whatever they say, even accurately, to be treated with respect by the teacher. For example, when students finish answering the questions, the teacher had better say, "Thank you," not "yes" or "no." If the teacher said "yes," other students will give the similar answer to it. If the teacher said "no," the students will lack of courage to answer questions in the next class. There is today an increasing emphasis on involving students in decisions affecting their own learning, getting them to take responsibility for their own learning decisions, and to consciously develop learning skills. Teachers' roles. According to Halliday's functional approach, it views language as a form of doing rather than knowing. Therefore, the teacher's task is to develop the competence to use language, not to let the students know the language knowledge. The teacher's role in the genuine student-centered orientation is not a single-minded act of lesson-based teaching, but multiple, as shown in Figure A. Gu Yugua. 1999, Theory of Notional Functional Syllabus. A notional functional syllabus is an approach where the organization of the material is determined with notions or ideas that learners expect to be able to express through the target language and the functions acts learners expect to be able to accomplish. Wilkins, 1976. The functional notional syllabus takes semantic knowledge as primary and attempts to answer the question, what do users of the language need to express? This implies a belief in language as a system, but a system of meaning rather than forms. Johnson, 1982. It answers that learning language consists of learning how to mean. Such a syllabus would seek correlations between form and function, but would define the link as being between the forms of the language available to the user and the meanings he wishes to express. Munby, 1978. As described by Wilkins, 1976, the functional notional syllabus has its starting point something different from either the grammatical syllabus or the situational one. He also points that it is not the linguistic items to be taught but rather the behavioral organization in terms of the purposes for which language is being learned and the kinds of language performance, in terms of language functions, necessary for such purposes. The roots of this type syllabus would be to look at kinds of meanings which have to be considered in second language teaching. Yalden, 1983. Therefore, within them a central concerning is that the meaning of an expression originates from the whole situation in which language is used, not from words or sentences in isolation. 1.1 The theories of language. Richards and Rogers, 2001, show a structural view of language, which is that language is a system of structurally related elements for the coding of meaning. They also identify a functional aspect, which states that language is a vehicle for the expression of functional meaning. The notional functional syllabus was influenced by the functional view of language, which itself was partly opposite aspect and partly an evolution of the structural view of language. There have been numerous educators to discuss the communicative revolution beyond structural analyses of language which is provided by linguists but with considering what communicative ability in a language entailed. Therefore, it would apparent that a different view of language would help learners to develop such ability. Malinoshi, 1923, showed that the functional view of language was superior to the structural view, and the discourse in context was extremely important. Teaching the knowledge of the structure of written or spoken texts was more important than exclusively teaching grammatical correct sentences to language learners. The functional view of language also has an intimate relationship with the view expressed by the likes of Himes, 1972, i.e., linguistic theory needed to be seen as part of a more general theory incorporating communication and culture. Halliday, 1970, argues that since all the functions of language are usage of studied language, linguistic is considered with the description of speech acts or texts, therefore all components of meaning have been brought into focus of the notional functional syllabus. Above all, it can say that how the notional functional syllabus's focus on the meanings and functions of language was strongly influenced by functional and communicative views of language. 1.2 The theories of language learning/acquisition. Richard and Rogers, 2001, also distinguish between two basic types of learning theories: process-oriented theories which build on learning processes, such as habit formation, induction, inference, hypothesis testing, and generalization, and condition-oriented theories, which emphasize the nature of the human and physical context in which language learning takes place. Although it is true that teaching notions and functions must be with using behaviorist techniques. And Widdowson, 1990, notes that teachers were not bound to interpret the syllabus in line with its intentions. In practically, there came to be a strong alliance between the functional view of language represented by the notional functional syllabus and a condition-oriented, communicative approach to learning. As Wilkins, 1976, points that the meaning must be considered through the study of language in use, language in discourse. So we study the communicative functions of language and their relation to grammatical forms through approach language in this way. Moreover, the goal of learning language is communicative and not formal perfection in the learner. Language is seen as essentially a function of society, serving an interpersonal role, and making each speaker a member of a speech community through its use. Meanwhile, the grammatical syllabus teaches the language for learners by taking them progressively through the structures of the target language. The situational syllabus does so through recreating the situations in which native speakers use the language. Wilkins, 1976. Wilkins, 1976, also points that the combination of grammar, lexis, stylistics, linguistic and non-linguistic context and, in speech, intonation ensures that any two sentences hardly have exactly the same meaning, since the learning of a language is most commonly identified with acquiring digestion of its grammatical system, it is not surprising that most courses have grammatical pedagogic organization. And courses are based on the systematic introduction of vocabulary and others which take language situations as the starting point. Therefore, the functional notional syllabus is not necessarily mutually exclusive. Regarding them from the linguistic point of view, Richards, 2001, asserts that the notional functional syllabus not only be considered with an analytic approach for language learning but also was combined with restating of traditional structural grammar rules as functions. From above, Richards and Rogers, 2001, asserts that one of the first syllabus models to be proposed for communicative teaching was described as a notional syllabus and the progenitor of the notional syllabuses himself. And Wilkins, 1981, highlights that the communicative purposes of language learning link the notional approach to the wider communicative movement in language teaching. Therefore, the notional functional syllabus was one answer to the question of what kind of course content should be used to lead learners acquire the ability to convey communicative meaning through language. The strengths and weaknesses of the notional functional syllabus. The notional functional syllabus concerns two important elements. One is a notional or conceptual view, which is involved with some concepts such as time, space, movement, cause and effect. Another one is functional view, which is used for intentional or purposive description and classification. It is a new type of syllabus because it could take notional functional categories as an organizing principle, which would not only be determined by grammatical considerations but also be concerned with communicative categories into account as well. White, 1988. All of the grammatical syllabus, the situational syllabus, and notional functional syllabus belong to Type A syllabuses. Neither grammatical nor situational syllabus would be denied that the purpose of learning languages is to communicate. Both of them give learners few adequate opportunities to promote the communicative capacity. However, the notional functional syllabus takes the desired communicative capacity as the starting point. From the notional functional syllabus, it asks speakers to communicate through language. So the designers are able to organize language teaching in concerning of the content rather than the form of the language. Wilkins, 1976. 2.1 The strengths of the notional functional syllabus. The advantages of the notional syllabus include that it could consider the communicative facts of language from the beginning with concerning of grammatical and situational factors. So it is superior to the grammatical syllabus. Possibly, Wilkins, 1976. In the grammatical syllabus, language elements are demonstrated more in complete possibilities of the language than the use of it needed in conversation. So learners would complain that foreign language learning is not practical and they have few opportunities to use out of it. However, a functional notional syllabus would teach language to use it rather than instructing the use of its exclusive forms. As teaching the language through its uses, learners would consider the utility and the relevance of their study. Wilkins, 1976. Moreover, Harlow and Linda L. 1978 point that by perceiving language as a real means of communication, learners would feel more motivated to learn as they would feel what they were learning is useful. Language functions in a real-life setting would generate a special kind of excitement for learning and leads to productive learning. Therefore, as comparing to the structural syllabus where elements of language are learned in an isolated way from real life, students' communicative competence and confidence can be well developed, and teachers can revitalize teaching materials to meet learning objectives in functional notional approach study. Furthermore, the functional notional syllabus is superior to the situational syllabus because it can include both of the most important grammatical forms and all kinds of language functions in it rather than concentrate those exist in specific situations. Typically, Wilkins, 1976. From above it can say that this type of syllabus does have some significant merits as follows. The first merit of the functional notional syllabus is that it emphasizes the fact that students and their communicative purposes are at the very core of the teaching program. The learner's actual and foreseeable academic, social, and vocational needs will underlie all aspects of the programs of linguistic and cultural content. While due attention is given to certain aspects of selection and grading of linguistic cultural content, the primary consideration is those functions that persons of a particular age level, in a particular situation, would wish or need to express. Thus, it suits the need of learners. This syllabus is extremely useful for ESP clauses in which the learners can learn part of the language which they are badly in need without wasting their time and energy for detailed study of the whole language system. The second merit of this syllabus is that the act of communication, even at the elementary levels, will be intrinsically motivating. Unlike the grammatical syllabus, which separates the language into discrete items and from which the learners have to communicative competence at the very beginning, the language forms, its functions, and communicative skills they have learned can be used immediately in the communicative activities and in role plays, or even in the real world. This direct effect of language use motivates the learners. They feel quite satisfied and are eager to learn as much as possible according to their needs because they are not passive listeners but active participants. The third merit is that language functions are quite generalizing. According to Wilkins, 1973-1976, 8 types of communicative functions are recognized, that is, 8 kinds of things learners can do with language, such as 1. Modality, to express degrees of certainty, necessity, conviction, obligation, and tolerance. 2. Moral discipline and evaluation, judgment, approval, disapproval. 3. Suasion, persuasion, recommendation, predictions. 4. Argument, information asserted or sought, agreement, denial, concession. 5. Rational inquiry and exposition, author's note, similar. In subcategories to argument and evaluation. 6. Personal emotions, positive and negative. 7. Emotional relations, greeting, flattery, hostility. 8. Interpersonal relations, politeness and status, degree of formality and informality. In a word, the functions of language, the very cores of the functional notional syllabus, are fairly generalizing. 2.2 The weaknesses of the functional notional syllabus. Every syllabus has its demerits, so does the functional notional syllabus. When putting it into practice, we will find that it presents some problems. What could make learners be able to communicate best in the foreign language? Decide the process of what to teach. Wilkins, 1976. So when we can decide the most appropriate forms for each type of communication, we can establish the syllabus. Although Hedge, 2000, claims that structural syllabuses are amendable to planning, provide systematicity, and make learners feel secure, the symbol of the each learning unit is semantic. Basically, Wilkins, 1976. Noonan, 1988, asserts that an alternative to the grammatically oriented textbook may not solve all of the problems in language teaching. These lists of functions and notions do not reflect the way languages are learned. Dividing language into discrete units of functions may misrepresent the nature of language as communication. Widdowson, 1978, Noonan, 1988. Therefore, the structural syllabus's coverage with notional functional ones, they are both product-based, synthetic syllabuses. In short, the semantic needs of learners decide the planning of the linguistic content. Above all, it is ensured that this type of syllabus has some weaknesses as follows. The first problem is that language functions alone are not a satisfactory organizing principle. In the first place, some realizations of functions are in fact little more than fixed phrases, e.g., you must be joking. Come off it. It may be important to learn them, but that is all we learn. In other words, some functional exponents are just single items. We cannot use them to generate more language as we can with grammatical structure. Conclusion. Functional National is a method of language teaching that categorizes along with others under the rubric of a communicative approach. The method stresses a means of organizing a language syllabus. This approach holds that the classification of skill levels should be based on what people want to do with the language, functions, or in terms of what meanings people want to convey, notions. A functional notional approach to language learning places major emphases on the communicative purposes of speech or in speaking skill. That is what people want to do or accomplish through speech. In teaching language, the functional notional approach to language helps the teacher to identify the needs of the learner and analyze the needs in order to draw the syllabus, beside that also to teach the purposes of speech. Applied Linguistics Group uploaded this video. This group is for helping students of BS, MS, MPhil, and PhD in English Linguistics, Applied Linguistics TFL, TESOL, TOEFL, and IELTS students. Dr. Khalid Malik is the founder of Applied Linguistics Group's youtube.com/@1966 Pakistani. Dr. Khalid Malik has a PhD in Applied Linguistics TESOL. He published more than 25 research papers. He taught a lot of foreign universities and admitted to a postdoctoral study project in Canada. Help others easily find Applied Linguistics group by copying or downloading a QR code to join.